Welcome to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. I'm your host, Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. Haviv, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a long time.
Really leading into that, Amanda.
I know. Nobody can do a rish like Amanda.
It's good to be here.
It's so great to have you. And what we are planning on doing today is going through a speech that U.S. President Donald Trump gave on May 13th in Saudi Arabia and discussing its implications for the Mideast and also Israel specifically. So we're going to talk about all of this and more when we're back.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up and how we grew up here. It's just, I think once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with Haviv Rettig Gur. Haviv, it's so rare that our editor-in-chief sends around a link and asks everyone on staff to take a look at it. And that is the case of the transcript of the speech that U.S. President Donald Trump gave to the Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum in Riyadh on May 13th. It was so important, he felt, that we all read these words in order to get a sense of Trump's mindset according to what he feels is his mission as U.S. president, specifically in the Middle East, but not only. It really laid out a lot of his just everything that he stands for in so many ways. Did you have that impression when you were watching or reading the speech yourself, Haviv?
Absolutely. He goes from, all of his domestic politics, jobs are coming back and the tariffs are working and all the things that the Biden administration did wrong and the prices are dropping on consumer goods. And then he pivots to the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris, and he lavishes them with compliments. And then he really takes he presents a vision of how American foreign policy should be, or rather what it should not be, which is he goes after interventionists, people who thought they could nation build and ended up wrecking nations. And he says, everything you've built, everything we've seen here, these beautiful places, he talks about the skyscrapers of Riyadh, was done in an Arab way. It's Arabian nation building of Arab countries. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think those are his instincts. And I think he laid them out there. And I think he has pursued them in every arena that we can take a look at.
I mean, I did not fact check every single statement in this speech, and I assume you didn't either, Haviv. So we are going to take it in a different level, more as a metaphorical level than various pinpointing numbers and percentages and things of that nature. But I thought it was very interesting that he began the speech referencing Roosevelt. And I thought that was really a fascinating way to begin the speech, that is talking about strong friendship, but by anchoring it in that 1945 meeting, it's also talking about decades-long friendship.
At the time, 1945 is the post-war period, and the fate of the post-British Middle East, right? The British are beginning to understand that the empire will be dismantled. Churchill's trying to stop it, but Churchill's now gone, and Attlee is in power, and Roosevelt meets with the Saudi king, and it begins just as Trump said, I mean, an 8-decade American-Saudi alliance built around oil. And it's not a small thing, and America invests massively in Saudi Arabia over those decades, and the Saudis invest massively in their relationship with the United States. So there really is this close alliance. What was interesting with Trump was that he took great pains to tell the Saudis, frankly, to tell the Saudis the one thing that nobody quite knows. He said, ever since President Franklin Roosevelt met with King Salman's father, King Abdulaziz, aboard the USS Quincy in 1945, the U.S.-Saudi relationship has been a bedrock of security and prosperity. And then he says, today we reaffirm this important bond and we take the next steps to make our relationship closer, stronger, and more powerful than ever before. He's talking, of course, about Saudi investment in the United States. And then he says, it is more powerful than ever before, and by the way, it will remain that way. We don't go in and out like other people. It will remain that way. Now, of course, under the Biden administration, there was a lot of distance, a lot of daylight with the Saudis, and there was a lot of criticism over the killing of this Saudi journalist in Turkey, and there's a lot of tension. And Trump is saying, no, you can trust us. Now, I don't think the Saudis can trust the United States. If they could trust the United States, they wouldn't be investing $1 trillion in the American economy. But once you invest that $1 trillion, maybe America becomes, a trustworthy ally. So that whole conversation was absolutely fundamental. America will back the Saudis, cling to the Saudis. The Saudis know that they are safer because of it, vis-a-vis their regional enemies like Iran. That was a very significant statement that I think undergirds a lot of what's happening between the United States and the Gulf states.
Now, a lot of the backlash that we've heard about this speech since it was given deals with two main points, and from my point of view. One is the lack of addressing the lack of human rights in the Saudi empire, essentially. And the other one is the lack of addressing any kind of, culpability for the 9/11 attacks, for example. Though I would have to say that Trump talks about terrorism all the time. It is almost a leitmotif throughout the speech. He addresses it at the beginning, middle, and end. And in the beginning, he said, exactly 8 years ago this month, I stood in this very room and looked forward to a future in which the nations of this region would drive the forces of terrorism and extremism, drive them right out of existence, and take your place among the proudest, most prosperous, most successful nations anywhere in the world as leaders of a modern and rising Middle East. And then he credits King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed with doing this in Saudi Arabia. So what do you think the point is here? I mean, is there, from Trump's point of view, no terrorism? Was there never any terrorism in Saudi Arabia? Where do you see this?
I think he's largely right. The Saudis were the great funders of the Wahhabi school systems and mosques of the world, of this very sort of radical version of Islam that sought to, a very puritanical version, a very anti-Western version of Islam. And they were funding it all over the world, and it was also generating, in some places, actual terror organizations. And then 9/11 happened, and the Saudis were very embarrassed. And after 9/11, another thing happened, which the Saudis registered even stronger, which was that the regime itself was attacked by the Frankenstein monsters that it had created. Al-Qaeda detonated, I think it was 2 enormous suicide bombings in Riyadh in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, but folks can look this up. And the regime realized that this thing that it had built was turning on it. And so they set about a 2-decade process of de-radicalization, and sometimes quite aggressive de-radicalization. I mean, people were arrested. The things that imams could say in mosques was very carefully tracked and very carefully controlled by the regime. And the money that traveled internationally to support these very radical versions of Islam was no longer supporting those versions. And the Saudis really pivoted A similar, smaller, but similar process happened in the Emiratis, in the Emirates, and so Trump is saying something very real, which is, not out of morality, not out of a sense that, oh no, but out of a sense that the kinds of Islam, that the puritanical kinds of Islam that the Saudis were funding, frankly, destroy everything it touches. What has that radical Islam done for Palestinians in the form of Hamas, which detonated suicide bombings on every peace process? How's that worked out for Palestinians, which launched October 7 and promised more October 7s to ensure the war never stops? And the Israelis never really are willing to actually let Hamas remain. Even Israelis who want to pull out for hostages don't think Gaza is going to be rebuilt and don't think they're not going to go back in another war. And et cetera. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, radicalized Islam of the kind the Saudis are funding, or the Shia version, destroys everything it touches. So yes, the Saudis, the Emiratis, have engaged in a very serious, profound de-radicalization of their society over a generation. And I think that Trump seeing that is a very useful thing and a very important thing. And I think that the Americans, the Democrats, getting morally horrified at the death of this journalist Khashoggi to the point where they toss the Saudis out and leave them swinging in the wind, was just unbelievably incompetent and stupid. The Saudis assassinated a journalist. It's a terrible thing. That journalist was a supporter of the radical versions of Islam that produced terrorism. Also, the Yemen war, 250,000 people starved to death. The Syria war, the Democrats were not eager to do a damn thing about, right? So there's so much moral preening and virtue signaling that drove so much of democratic foreign policy in the Middle East, that someone who just comes in the Middle East's own terms, sees a good trend and understands it, was a breath of fresh air. I have a lot of critiques of this speech. That piece was a breath of fresh air.
I'll just double down on what I read before with another statement on this theme. And Trump said, before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other out of existence. We don't want that. So this, to me, I bolded it on the piece of paper that I scrawled it on, and it just so sums up his guiding philosophy. We're talking about commerce, not chaos, exports technology, not terrorism, and where people are building, not bombing. And that was basically the whole theme of the entire speech, in my opinion. Did you hear something different, Haviv?
I'll say even more than that. He specifically and explicitly and repeatedly brought the blame, the opposite, treated, the antithesis to all the good that he saw in the Gulf was Iran. He actually said at some point, a little after what you quoted, our task is to unify against the few agents of chaos and terror that are left and that are holding hostage the dreams of millions and millions of great people. The biggest and most destructive of these forces is the regime in Iran, which has caused unthinkable suffering in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Yemen, and beyond. And, can't ask for more clarity than that.
For sure. And what was also really interesting, of course, is that there were two enemies in the speech. The big baddie was Iran, but I think almost at the same level in terms of time spent denigrating him was Biden, which I found just fascinating because Trump won the election. He is now the president. Why spend, I don't know, perhaps even 20% of the speech talking about how bad Biden was? I really am not a political strategist. So, Haviv, why do you think he spent so much time on putting down Biden?
That's a great question. I was thinking it as I read, because it constantly comes back to this refrain of Biden. And I'm of two minds. A, it's Trump. It's Trump, the personal, the egotistical will never not be there, and don't expect from him, Lincoln style, flights of profound, evocations of our collective memory and mystic chords of, don't expect that from Trump. That's one. Two, he's going to a region in which the Biden administration has really left a lot of a lot of shattered trust. Sometimes out of, mistakes, sometimes out of, misplaced loyalties, and sometimes out of just profound and shocking incompetence. And that has to be said. That has to be said. When the Biden administration slowed down the Gaza war, they weren't helping Gazans. They just dragged out the suffering of Gazans. And they weren't convincing the Israelis to fight in a different way, because they were just convincing the Israelis that they were not for destroying Hamas. And when the Biden administration turned on the Saudis, moralizing and turned on the Saudis, but also didn't enforce sanctions on Iran. Well, that's not a consistent moral standard. That's not a, what is your strategy? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? What must be defeated? You know what? Nobody's perfect, so you got to choose. You got to prioritize. The Biden administration was so busy moralizing, it didn't prioritize, and it didn't strategize seriously in the Middle East. And so I think that a lot of it, maybe all of it, is just Trump being Trump. Some of it possibly, is that Trump knows he's speaking to audiences who are genuinely burned on America, because America's untrustworthy. Not that they don't want a massive alliance with America and America to back them and to invest in America. And the Saudis who are going to invest whatever it is, $1 trillion in America, they don't think that's a bad investment. They're going to make money off that investment. And they think that by making that investment, they're going to hold America close to them. The people who paved the way on this are the Qataris, who bought so much of American politics and American industry and Wall Street and the universities. They're the biggest foreign funder of American universities. And the Saudis are like, well, we got as much, more money than God, not just the Qataris, right? We can buy the Americans as well. And so there's that dynamic, but you can never quite trust the Americans not to then turn super moralistic in inconsistent ways that make them an unpredictable partner and therefore not a trustworthy ally. All of that, I think Trump did find it useful to say, we're here. This is the new America. We're coherent. We're consistent. We're looking out for our interests. Luckily, your interests and our interests align, and they don't align in the short term. They align in the long term. We can do business. And he needs to say, Biden was incompetent. Don't worry, that's not representative of America. Let's do business, because they burned so many bridges, the Democratic administration that came before him.
Okay, let's go to a short break, and then we're going to discuss what he said about the Abraham Accords.
Israel Bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Israeli-Hamas war hit, Israel Bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Israel Bonds pledges to ensure Israel thrives and flourishes. Investing in Israel Bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. So now I'm going to quote from a portion of the speech in which President Trump addresses the Abraham Accords. And he said, and with the historic Abraham Accords that we're so proud of, all the momentum was aimed at peace, and it aimed very successfully. It's been an amazing thing, the Abraham Accords, and it's my fervent hope, wish, and even my dream that Saudi Arabia, a place I have such respect for, especially over the last fairly short period of time, what you've been able to do, but will soon be joining the Abraham Accords. I think it'll be a tremendous tribute to your country, and it will be something that's really going to be very important for the future of the Middle East. And here's a section that I found really, really interesting. ... And you'll be greatly honoring me. And you'll be greatly honoring all those people that have fought so hard for the Middle East. And I really think it's going to be something special. But you'll do it in your own time. And that's what I want. And that's what you want. And that's the way it's going to be. So, of course, this week we heard reports that Hamas launched October 7th to torpedo the Abraham Accords, the normalization of Saudi Arabia with Israel. This is something that we've thought for a long time, and some new documents were unearthed and publicized. But I thought this statement was so profound. The idea of honor, the idea that they'll do it in their own time. What do you make of that, Haviv?
I think he wants it. I think he wants it for himself. He wants it because it's good strategy. He wants a broad-based pro-American alliance that is the most powerful thing in the Middle East, because then the Middle East is an American Middle East as opposed to a Chinese Middle East. China is moving in on Iran. China brokered a couple of years ago an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia that the Saudis ran to as the weaker party, essentially because they wanted to tell the Iranians, we're not going to be part of an alliance against you. Please don't hit us with all of your proxies, like the Houthis of Yemen, who demonstrated in the Yemen war a few years back, I forget what it is, 4 or 5 years back, when they launched a couple of rockets at the largest Saudi oil export facility, and basically shut down Saudi oil exports until it could be repaired. And so Saudi Arabia discovered it is utterly fragile and vulnerable to Iranian proxies. And so they, brokered by the Chinese, they ran to the Iranians and signed a kind of, non-aggression pact. What Trump is saying, by doubling down, he mentioned Iran again and again and again, and actually said, that's a nice nuclear program. Shame if something would happen to it, right? He said, we have the strongest military. You can't have nukes. We're not going to let you. The last administration was weak. If I had been in power, there wouldn't have been an October 7, he said, because Iran wouldn't have had the money to supply the hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas that it needed to prepare October 7, which is that chain of events is absolutely correct. And whether or not Trump would have prevented October 7, I don't know. But that Iran had that kind of support for October 7 was absolutely correct. And in the places that Iran has destroyed, he included Gaza. And so I think that his whole vision was very clear, very much Saudi-centric. And he was telling the Saudis, a piece of this defense that you need to oppose Iran, to be close to America, to stand on your own 2 feet and be safe. We have to take down the Iranian empire and the Iranian maybe regime. He didn't say we're taking down the regime, but he did say we're gonna prevent it from being able to cause terrible harm. And a piece of that is normalization and alliance, really, with Israel. So he wants it. He wants it. Everyone keeps talking about him getting a Nobel Peace Prize, that's a huge priority for him. He himself has said that. I think he really wants it. An Israeli-Saudi normalization is a reshaping of the Middle East.
It definitely is. And of course, Trump being Trump, he also stated that there wouldn't have been a Ukraine war, that President Putin wouldn't have dared invade Ukraine. So you never know exactly what he's thinking, or the opposite. You actually know exactly what he's thinking always. And one of the things he also mentioned is about enemies. And he said really interesting things, actually, because a lot of people consider Trump as somebody who holds grudges. And this is part of the rhetoric surrounding the relationship between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Trump, and that their relationship was frayed when Bibi congratulated Biden on his win. So I don't know. I mean, put that to the side. But Trump himself said, I have never believed in having permanent enemies. I am different than a lot of people think. I don't like permanent enemies. Sometimes you need enemies to do the job, and you have to do it right. Enemies get you motivated. And in fact, this is the kicker, some of the closest friends of the United States of America are nations we fought wars against in generations past, and now they're our friends and our allies. Really interesting, especially when you're talking in the context of the speech in which he's building a castle of long-term loyalty, long-term relationship with Saudi Arabia. And then we have this whole section about enemies, becoming friends, becoming allies. Confusing to me. What do you make of that, Haviv?
I mean, I didn't really think about it that much because, I mean, I agree, obviously. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to be going to, skiing in Lebanon and visiting the old Jewish community of the old Jewish areas of Baghdad, and I'd like to be friends with old enemies. I mean, there's nothing fundamental. I don't need any enemy in this world to disappear. There's a particular problem with this Iranian regime that it wants to murder my kids and destroy my people. Most Iranians, by the way, as far as we can tell, and as much as we know from research and polling and such, do not. So I think that was a very clear and obvious. It's good he said it because people don't say it, and sometimes the obvious things are the things we don't, because it's so obvious nobody ever brings it up, so we forget that we know this thing. But yeah, why not?
And of course,
Yeah.
the panacea to everything is trade and making deals and economic prosperity. And I mean, from Trump's
Right.
point
He
of view,
even said in Pakistan he solved with trade. Right.
yeah, the India-Pakistan he solved with trade, and he wants to solve Ukraine war with trade. I mean, we're seeing this everywhere. And in fact, his proposal for Gaza is, in a way, it's real estate development. So that's another kind of trade in a lot of ways. And it's just fascinating because you see this billionaire president who has made himself into this political figure based on his success in business. And here he is taking that as basically his diplomacy to the world. So I don't know, Haviv, many other things haven't worked. So maybe this is it. I don't know.
Trade is not the solution in the sense that it's not going to convince Hamas to stop. In other words, the groups there's a sunk cost problem. I mean, the groups that have invested the entire polity, that have destroyed too much of their own people on this one ideological path, on this one vision of religious redemption, they're not going to now say, oh, well, I mean, if we have a free trade agreement with Canada, okay, then we can pivot and everything will be fine. But what I do think is a very powerful and important point, and a classic American point, I mean, this is the American vision for centuries, is that once you kick out the narrow elite, the narrow group that has this insane vision, and Trump talked about it. He had, what did he say about Hamas? The people of Gaza, he talks about October 7's atrocities against Israel, and it would never have happened if he was president. And then he says, the people of Gaza deserve a much better future. And you're starting to think, wait, he's about to criticize Bibi, who hasn't clarified Gaza's future, despite a lot of people screaming at him for 19 months to do so. And then he says, that will or cannot occur as long as their leaders choose to kidnap, torture, and target innocent men, women, and children for political ends. The way those people are treated in Gaza, there's not a place in the world where people are treated so badly. It's horrible. It's Hamas. Hamas is the problem. And you have to uncork. Hamas is the thing stuck in the way of Gaza's. And once Hamas is gone, trade. The Iranian regime, he talks about in the same terms. These are bad people doing bad things. If they can wake up to the fact that they can have a great, bright future minus a nuclear program, fantastic. If they can't, they're the problem, and there is a military option. I don't know if he's telling the truth on these things. In other words, I don't know if there is a military option. I don't know if he's willing to see through a war to actually remove Hamas. But I do think that that's his basic insight, and I do think that that's the classic American insight. Sometimes as a bad actor, a tyrant in charge, you get rid of that tyrant. The rebuilding is just trade, commerce. That's the fundamental purpose of life. That's what nations are for. That's why you build a military, to protect commerce, right? You don't do commerce so you can have a bigger military, so you can have a grand empire. So he's just expressing a classic American position.
And what's so fascinating, I know many of our readers will know, the Purim festival is accompanied by the reading of Megillat Esther. And what's so interesting about this Megillah is there's no mention of God in it. There's no actual mention of the word God in it. And in this very long speech, I think it's over 50 minutes when you don't play it on double speed, which I do, which is really fun actually to hear Trump speak in double speed. But it is over 50 minutes, and it's all about Israel in so many ways, but Israel is not mentioned. We have the Houthis, we have Hezbollah, we have Hamas, we have October 7th, but I don't think, I mean, I'm going to have to do a proper search, but I don't think Israel even once is mentioned in this. And that to me is one of the most interesting things about this speech.
I didn't see Israel mentioned. I'm actually searching right this second because I hadn't noticed. But I think you might be absolutely right. All civilized people must condemn the October 7 atrocities against Israel.
Ah, you got me, Haviv.
That's it. No, but that's it.
The
only mention of Israel is that one mention of October 7 where he then talks about Hamas. Nothing about Israel in the normalization conversation, nothing about Israel vis-a-vis Iran, nothing about Israel in terms of Bibi, nothing about Israel in it. I mean, that's basically not mentioning Israel at all. I think that's astonishing. Yeah, I think, frankly, and we've talked about this, and other people at the Times of Israel talked about it more wisely than I have. Laser, for example, has written about this. He's waiting for Israel to be useful. There's a real problem where, he wants to see a path out of Gaza. This is a man who bombed the Houthis for a month. Biden bombed the Houthis for a year, kept bombing. Trump bombs the Houthis for a month. It's not working. They caused some harm. The Houthis would have preferred it to stop, so he got some kind of, at least verbal concession that they're not going to attack global shipping, which they already hadn't been doing for quite a bit. He bombs them for a month. It's not working. He says, stop. We're not going to lose money. Every drone that the Houthis shoot down is $30 million. We're shooting $1 million rockets at people who are shooting $600 drones at our ships. So stop. And he stopped, right? He wants slam dunks. He wants home runs. He wants to see easy solutions. And Netanyahu has not been able to articulate to him a path forward in Gaza. Probably because any path forward Netanyahu would articulate, for example, some kind of Gazan government, some kind of Arab control of Gaza, would lose him one or two of his coalition partners, and he's not willing to do that. Any path forward of any kind would be politically difficult, and so he won't articulate a path forward, which has led, by the way, a lot of Israelis to think that he's dragging out the war for political reasons. He is a man who's preferring political need to the actual victory, to the actual ability to produce a strategic gain in Gaza. Now, as long as he actually defeats Hamas, all will be forgiven retroactively. But he's a man who's lost the trust of most Israelis that he knows how, and certainly has lost the trust of the Trump administration that he knows how. And so they won't invest in him. They won't back him. There was a leak. I forget who it was. It might have been to Jacob of the Times of Israel, but it was to somebody. Forgive me, whoever you are, especially if you're Jacob, if I forget who the leak was to. But there was a Trump administration official who was asked, "Why won't Trump visit Israel on this first visit? It doesn't look good." And he said, "There's nothing that Trump would get for it. There's nothing to be. He wouldn't. He'll come in if he's announcing, this success, that success, this achievement. There are no achievements on the line. The Israelis don't even tell us there's going to be. We can't even announce that 3 months from now we're going to visit because something will have been achieved and the president can show something." That's, I think, the story of Israel not being in that speech. Israel is sitting out this great, grand, success tour of Trump rebuilding trade alliances, rebuilding old alliances. And the Israelis can't offer any solutions to the problems that we face. It's a huge problem. We're coming hand in hand, hoping the Americans help us on Iran, but they have their own strategy with Iran, their own schedule on Iran. It's very frustrating. And I think maybe the solution is not an easy one, but I think the solution will require courage. And that courage is to step away from America. The original alliance under Kennedy, under LBJ, was partly because the Israelis were perceived by the Americans as suddenly having become a nuclear power. And the priority became not to make them afraid, not to make them ever think of using their nuclear power. So you bear hug them, you protect them, but you also, through protecting them very, very closely and establishing very, very tight ties, control them and track them and make sure they don't do anything stupid. Israel as an X factor, as a variable that's a little bit dangerous, that has an independent mind, is an Israel that America respected more than the Israel of Netanyahu, which comes hand in hand to the Trump administration, burns bridges with the Democrats because everything is Trump and he'll give us everything, and he's the new Persian Emperor Cyrus. And then it turns out Trump actually is the American president, not the Israeli Uber president, right? And so I think Netanyahu has some serious realignment thinking that he has to do. The friendship with America, the alliance with America will be strengthened if the Americans think, A, we have solutions, B, we can set out on our own. We don't depend on them. That'll make that friendship more useful to them. So, Israel wasn't in that speech.
Haviv, always fascinating. Thank you so much for your insights here.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. Please check out another installment next week. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next week, shalom.